No one ever forgets the sound of an A-10 Warthog's Gu-8. They say it sounds like God ripping open the sky. But that day in the Black Desert Valley of northern Kunar, when the SEAL team was down to their very last 2 magazines, even God felt far away. Dust storm rolling in, hard incoming fire from 3 ridgelines. Comms half jammed, and the only extraction bird was shot down 5 minutes earlier. They were alone. There were moments in war where men didn't fear death, they feared not being found. Not being known. Not being remembered. Why are not getting out of this alive? Chief Mason muttered under his breath while dragging PO2 Diaz behind a half-shattered boulder. He didn't say it as panic. He said it like a math conclusion. Rounds snapped over them so fast that sound barely separated bullet from air anymore. The Taliban Winter Brigade pushing with numbers that didn't even make sense. Dozens and dozens pouring in from the switchbacks above like ants that smelled blood. High ground advantage. Night vision advantage because theirs had better thermal overlays in this region. The SEALs were cornered in the worst possible geometry of the valley. The team had done impossible before. But this was beyond human math. Chief Mason was the type who didn't allow fear, not even as concept. But now his jaw clenched so hard his molars shook. "Where the hell is Cass?" Diaz shouted, voice cracking half in pain, half fury. Mason looked at him. There was a half-second where he didn't answer. Because he was thinking the truth, no one is coming. Then he forced the lie anyway. Because leaders don't collapse even when equations are impossible. "They'll be here. Hold your sector." Another RPG slammed into the rock formation above them and showered flaming debris across their position. Mason shielded Diaz with his body without hesitation. Diaz felt it. He knew this man was prepared to die on top of him. The dust storm punched harder. Visibility dropped to maybe 60 feet at best. Green NV static everywhere now. Enemy muzzle flashes looked like ghosts flickering in chaos. Another SEAL screamed from the right flank. Not death. But the kind of scream a man makes when bone is exposed to air. Mason felt his throat tighten. Another. They were getting surgically erased. The drone feed operator back at Bagram was watching in horror. Helpless. Repeating the same words over and over. "They're gone. They're already gone." He didn't realize his mic was still hot. And in a secure dispatch office on base. Inside a janitorial closet, actually. A man who wasn't even cleared for special access missions was sweeping hallway dust when he heard that line. "Sir. They're gone." He froze. The broom handle slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. He wasn't supposed to hear. He was definitely not supposed to even be near that channel. But something inside him, some ancient reflex, activated like muscle memory buried under 10 years of silence. He slowly pushed the closet door open just an inch. Inside, the operation officer slammed his fist into the table. No jets in range. No strike packages cleared. The nearest bird is 45 minutes out. 45 minutes. Another yelled. "They won't last 5. Someone cursed. Someone else just sat down and stared numbly at the floor. The janitor, Malik Rourke, felt his heartbeat turn heavy and metallic inside his ribs. Malik never talked about his old life on base. Most assumed he probably worked maintenance his whole life. No one there knew. No one there knew that 10 years ago, he was a Warthog pilot. 278 combat sorties, 2 distinguished flying crosses, and 1 little girl currently asleep in on-base housing, whose mother died of cancer, leaving Malik to raise her alone. He hadn't flown since. He swore he never would again. But those screams over the comms, those men, that desperate static. It was the same exact nightmare from his final deployment. The mission that still tore him awake, sweating almost nightly. One he never forgave himself for. Malik felt his knees almost buckle. He grabbed the broom to keep from collapsing to the tile. "No one is coming," he whispered. He didn't know if he was saying it to himself, or to those men dying on those rocks. He remembered all of them. Every face in the old flight squad. Men who trusted jets like angels. Men who died anyway. He swore he wouldn't fly again because flying meant losing again. But his gut. The one pilots carry like second brain. It told him one thing: those CLs weren't supposed to die today. And he could not walk out of this building pretending he didn't hear this transmission. His daughter would grow up one day. She would ask him who he was before he was just dad cleaning hallways. He could not let his answer be, "I let them die." He wiped his face with his sleeve, and walked straight into the ops room. Everyone stared at him like he was an intruder. The JTIC looked angry. "Sir, this is a sealed space." Malik cut him off. How many minutes until Warthog clearance if I lift right now? Silence. Slow disbelief. You can't. One officer stammered. You're not even active clearance. Answer me. They saw it in his eyes. Not ego, not insanity. Purpose. Finally someone said flatly. Even if someone launched right now. Storms are too thick for satellite-linked targeting. No one is stupid enough to fly hay-ass blind in that valley. Malik exhaled once through his nose. Calm. Like a man who had already decided his death and accepted it. I don't need satellite, he said. I know that terrain by muscle memory. Someone else whispered, realizing only now. He used to fly the hog. The room froze. Malik didn't wait for permission. He just said 2 words, voice low, controlled. Prep the bird. Then he walked out without looking back. Well, back in the valley. Chief Mason fired his last mag. He whispered to himself under his breath. Like private prayer. If there is anything left out there, anything we could use a miracle. Before he finished the sentence, a faint distant thunder rolled through the dust storm, low. Heavy. Ugly. The kind of sound that does not belong to this earth. The kind of sound enemies fear instinctively before they can even name it. Chief Mason's eyes widened. No way. He recognized that engine growl. The A-10 was coming. Right toward them. The enemy fighters on the ridges paused without knowing why. Predators know when a new predator enters the arena. Their eyes scanned the storming sky. Their commanders barked orders. Assuming maybe drones. Maybe a patch, something slow enough they could still brute through. They did not yet understand what kind of monster was approaching them. Down in the dust hell pit, Mason didn't even dare blink. He didn't believe in miracles. Not ever. Losing too many brothers teaches that. But there are sounds a man never forgets. There are weapons a man never stops believing in. As that a hog. Diaz coughed through blood. And actually started crying. Not out of sensitivity, but primal relief. That's a hog, Chief. That's a hog. But they had no idea who was flying it. Malik sprinted across the wet tarmac like a soldier half his age. He should not even have had this access. But the avionics crew recognized him. Old photos still hung in maintenance corridor frames. Legends don't actually disappear, they just shift shape. Sir, where is your clearance card? Malik didn't slow down. My clearance is 278 combat sorties. My clearance is that valley right now. The young airman froze. That was the exact valley his own cousin got killed in 6 months ago. He stepped aside. They hot-started the A-10 in a record 47 seconds. Every single ground crewman who helped knew this wasn't standard procedure. They knew this might end with all of them disciplined, transferred, court-martialed, something worse. But they also knew what the hog meant when nothing else could save them. Malik climbed inside the A-10 cockpit. With hands that had not touched these controls in over a decade. And those same hands slotted every switch, every electrical bus. Every RWR cycle in perfect memorized sequence. It was like someone had frozen his nervous system 10 years ago, and just unpaused it. When engines hit RPM stable, his body just clicked into the pilot he used to be. He whispered, not to God, but to his aircraft. Don't let this be the mission I die wrong on. He pushed throttle. The jet screamed forward. 2 back in the valley. Rounds were now hitting so close the rock vibrated like metal sheet. Mason shoved Diaz deeper behind the fractured slab. Diaz's breathing was ragged now. Not just pain. His body was shutting down. Mason. He whispered. Tell my sister, tell her I didn't run. That I stayed with my team. Shut up. Mason growled. You're not done. Diaz's eyes started to fade like dimming candle flame. Sarge, I can't feel my legs. You don't need them to stay alive. Mason grabbed his vest. Pulled his face close. Forcing eye contact. You stay awake until we're out. I'm not losing you, Diaz. A rocket detonated 40 feet away. Blast wind slamming them sideways. Mason's ears blew with pressure spike. Sound warped and muffled like underwater distortion. All he heard clearly was the one thing that cut through everything TTTT. The GU-8 ripped the air apart above them like a demonic buzzsaw. Enemy fighters on the high ridge simply evaporated. The line of fortifications behind them disintegrated in volcanic sprays of stone and dirt. Mason lifted his head. Stunned. That sound wasn't distant anymore. It was right above them. Diaz's eyes shot open like resurrection. Hog. That's hog. That is hog. The Warthog plunged through the dust wall like a dragon tearing through a nightmare. Its silhouette. Thick, brutish, ugly perfection. Banking hard, nose down. Painting the kill geometry by feel more than sight. Malik didn't have digital overlays. He didn't have satellite targeting. He didn't have data link. He had muscle memory, and pain strong enough that it functioned like radar. He locked the GAU by instinct pathways no algorithm could replicate. First run was suppression. Second was attrition. He throttled low. Dangerously low, skimming so close to the mountain face that enemy fighters thought he would crash. They cheered prematurely. Then he rolled inverted and fired another burst straight into the switchback choke, where reinforcements were funneling from. The storm kicked up debris so savage it was raining shrapnel on 3 kilometers of combat slope. Mason yelled into broken comms. Even if the pilot couldn't hear, "Send it again! Send it again! They're falling back." Malik didn't hear the words, but he felt the battlefield shift. The Predator energy flipped polarity. Now the enemy was prey. He angled deeper, dragging the nose through the densest concentration like a surgeon carving necrotic rot out of living tissue. His chest ached. His hands trembled once, then tightened. He whispered to himself, "You will not die like last time, not this time." He flew again, again, until enemy fire scattered in panic sprays that no longer had coordinated suppression. They broke. The Winter Brigade that was supposed to crush the CL element retreated down the mountain like ghosts panicking at daylight. Inside the valley, the dust storm began thinning just enough to see shapes again. Shapes of survival. Mason pressed his helmet against the rock. Overwhelmed. Eyes burning in disbelief. Diaz started laughing hysterically. Coughing in between. But laughing like someone who had already seen the gates and somehow got pulled backwards. Mason radioed what little comms link he had left. "CAST, whoever you are, don't leave us yet." Malik circled overhead. Heartbeat slowing. Adrenaline flattening into cold focus. He didn't say anything over the net. Because he wasn't sure his voice would hold steady. He wasn't sure what part of himself he had just awakened that he buried 10 years ago for a reason. But he wasn't leaving. He wasn't done. This wasn't rescue yet. This was only the beginning. Stay alive. Malik whispered to the men below. Even though they couldn't hear him. "I'm not letting anyone die today." Malik angled the Warthog wide and slow, letting the GAU-8 cool just enough as he assessed the next threat band. Watching the battlefield with instincts that were sharper now than they had been even in his prime. Something about this wasn't just skill. It felt like debt. The kind the universe eventually forces a man to pay with either his life or his redemption. Down in the valley, even the dirt seemed to pause. Enemy gunfire tapered. Replaced with the eerie echo of shifting avalanche dust and sporadic scattered panic shots from fighters no longer sure if hell came from above or within their own minds. Mason scanned for secondary assault units. The Taliban brigade wasn't stupid. They never committed everything at once. They tested, they overwhelmed, and they always sent backup layers. It was never over after one break. This was the one thing every special operator learned early. Victory wasn't when enemy fire stopped. Victory was when they stopped returning. Diaz tried to sit up but wheezed sharply, body rejecting motion. Mason gripped his vest and forced him down. "Don't move. You go into shock, you crash. Stay present. Keep talking to me." Diaz nodded. Mouth trembling. "We're actually gonna make it." Mason didn't answer right away. He looked back toward the ridgelines Malik had just shredded. Bodies lay twisted in broken silhouettes through powder haze. The Hog's strafing runs didn't just break formations. They broke morale physics. Men stop thinking rationally once doom has a physical sound. But Mason knew this terrain too well. This enemy too well. They had more. They always did. "We're not out yet," Mason said quietly. Diaz swallowed, eyes fluttering again. Hey, look at me," Mason snapped, tapping his helmet. "You stay awake, you hear me? You stay awake until we are wheels up." Diaz forced himself to breathe slow through the pain, nodding again. Mason triggered his last surviving comm encryption channel. A low band fallback frequency only used when everything else failed. "Mason to any friendly. Hog CS is active, but we need bird extraction and med priority. We are still in heavy threat zone. Re-engagement possible." A static. Then a cracked voice. A flight controller half sobbing. "Copy Mason. We see Hog. We didn't scramble him. Who the hell is flying that jet?" Mason didn't even blink. "Don't care. Just get us an extraction bird in the air." I-2 Malik flew low through the canyon mouth, RWR chirping proximity warnings but no clean radar lock. That was something. Storm interference was protecting him as much as it was hurting him. But the deeper problem was fuel. He launched hot. He didn't take full load. That meant he had minutes. not hours, of operational time before he would have to commit to bingo return or ditch. He checked the gauges. He had enough for maybe 2 more heavy gun runs, maybe. He heard his daughter's voice in his head. The last night before her mother died. The night she asked him if he still loved flying. He told her he did. But he didn't tell her that it scared him more than death itself. But here's the thing about the Hog. It didn't care about fear. It only cared about purpose. And Malik realized in this moment. This jet wasn't a machine. It was the last part of him that wasn't broken. Those men were alive because of this jet. For however short that window might be, they were alive. He angled back toward the SEAL position, scanning for movement. When a glint caught his eye on the far ridge near a black basalt shelf. It wasn't stray fighters, it was staging. Heavy weapon crews repositioning. They were setting up indirect fire. That wasn't just suppression. That was kill geometry refinement to finish the SEALs no matter chaos coverage. Malik's stomach dropped. They had mobile mortar systems coming online. Once those dialed range, even he couldn't stop the math. He keyed a local emergency override transmit and barked into the channel. Voice unfiltered. Mortar units on West Ridge. They're prepping fresh angle. Brace. Down below, Mason's eyes snapped to the ridge just as shells were being loaded. He cursed. Hard. Diaz whispered, "I'm sorry, Chief, I slowed you down." Mason gripped his arm so tight Diaz actually winced. "You slowed no one down. You bled with us. Don't apologize for surviving." He then raised his rifle. Even though he had maybe 3 rounds left in a half-spent mag. "If I'm going out," he muttered, "I'm going out firing." He steadied his sight. He leveled breath. He squeezed trigger. One mortar loader pitched backward with a clean skull snap. The other 2 flinched, lost rhythm for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was exactly what Malik needed. The Hog dropped like a falling building. Nose front. Wings banking tight. Metal shrieking in air friction. As he aligned the GAU not on the men, but the ammo crate pile right behind them. He fired the burst. Bar-r-r-r-r-t-t-t. The entire ridge section detonated like a volcanic eruption. Flaming munitions blasted outward. Fighters were flung off the cliff edge screaming into the abyss. Mason shielded Diaz again as concussion shockwaves hammered the valley like rolling thunder waves. Dust swallowed the world again. Diaz whispered, voice shaking, "Whoever that pilot is, he's a demon." "No," Mason said quietly. "He's someone who remembers what it costs to lose people." Waqil Malik steadied breathing. His hands shook slightly. He closed his eyes for 1 second. He knew that feeling too well. The moment where you commit to impossible price because there's no other currency left to negotiate with. He checked fuel again. He could do 1 more run. One last. After that, he'd be operating in disaster zone margin. He keyed comm again. Hog to ground. 1 more run. Make it count. Whatever you need done, call it now. Mason didn't hesitate. Clear the east slope choke at marker green 2. That's where reinforcements come from. Malik banked toward east slope. As he rolled into position, a sudden memory flash detonated inside him. Uninvited, violent. The mission from 10 years ago. The one that ruined him. He saw flaming parachutes. He heard screaming. He smelled burning fuel. He watched the men he failed to save die because he made a split-second hesitation. His chest froze. His breath locked. His vision doubled. For a second. Just a second. He wasn't sure he could pull trigger. And then, through the panic blackout, a different voice broke through the memory echo. His daughter's voice again. "Daddy, you're still a hero. Even if you're sad, you're still a hero." Malik steadied. He locked the GAU. The Warthog screamed downward like vengeance incarnate. He would not hesitate. Not again. The canyon inhaled Malik as he dove. Wind hammered the cockpit canopy like 1,000 palm strikes. Stones and dust blurred into streaks as the A-10 became less a plane and more a razor intent on carving open the dark geometry of the eastern choke. Every instrument needle screamed. His palms left wet prints on the control stick. Below, Mason watched the sky like a man watching a miracle act its work. He had seen air support many times, but never like this. A single ugly, stubborn machine committing itself as if it carried a human heartbeat too huge for its frame. The valley smelled of copper and hot metal and old fears surfacing into daylight. Green 2 is inbound. Mason shouted into his cracked throat, firing tracer to draw attention. He could see the runs being set up. Enemy fighters trying to reform, digging in, learning fast. Their officers were shouting in Pashto, passing commands through trembling teeth. The SEALs were moving like ghosts, counting rounds and hearts. Mason's left hand clamped tight on a bloodstained band around his wrist. A relic he'd kept since his first deployment when his brother didn't come home. Below the ridge, a young Taliban commander, barely older than a boy, spat and barked orders through a battered radio. He had lost 3 men to the Hog's last pass. He was stubborn and wanted revenge. He wanted to prove that humans could outmaneuver metal and fate. He sent runners, reallocated machine guns, and motioned for a flank that would bleed the valley dry. Malik dove, rolled, and squeezed, BRRRRTTT, a signature that tore space open. The burst hammered the east slope choke, shredding sandbags, shredding stockpiles, shredding the entire nerve center of the flanking maneuver. Men were thrown into ragged silhouettes of limb and scream. The ground erupted. Geometry of death remade into a single vibrating portrait of chaos. But then, like a serpent that had learned to coil twice, new fighters crawled from behind a crag, using an ancient goat path the locals knew and the military maps didn't. They were thin in number but precise. They were a single-minded force trained to exploit the human flaw Malik had. He could only be in one place at once. A tracer zipped past the canopy, a whispering threat kissing the aluminum shell. The RWR blinked like a furious heartbeat. Malik felt the jet shudder under a near miss. Debris smacked the left wing. A thin line of fuel warned him on a peripheral gauge. His hands tightened until knuckles went white. He thought of his daughter and tasted fear, bright and acid. He had promised not to die wrong. He hadn't promised escape. "Come on, old girl," he murmured, fingers finding the trigger again. He shifted angle, trading fuel economy for raw, aggressive geometry. He dove low and long, the JU singing like a reaper's hymn. He painted each charge, each choke, with machine gun arithmetic and unyielding intention. The enemy's attempt to flank became a massacre. The goat path became a grave trail. On the ground, Mason crawled out from behind a rock, dragging Diaz with him. Diaz's face was a pale, stunned mask, eyes distant but alive. Mason felt every limb ache with the strain of staying human. He had a plan. A thin, dangerous plan. To crawl up to a satellite beacon that could punch an extraction through storm interference. It was a long shot, it was a cold prayer. Green 2 is clear for another sweep. Mason murmured, watching smoke and ash paint the valley. But we need that beacon lit. We need a bird that can carry us out. CH-47, preferably. Do you think you can drag to the beacon, Diaz? Diaz laughed, sharp and disjointed. If you think I'm not going to crawl my own coffin to get out of here. You don't know me. A Mason's jaw twitched with a half-smile that tasted like copper. He gave Diaz a look with 2 words: move. Together they began a torturous crawl toward the beacon, using small boulders as cover. A map of their breaths and a schedule carved from stubbornness. Back up above, Malik looped and checked fuel. The gauge whispered that he had less than 15 minutes of gun, sustained time. He breathed into that window like someone holding a flame to a candle. He thought about radio chatter back at base. Faces that had called him a fool and faces that had said nothing. He thought about the pilot he had been, the father he was, and the ghost his hesitation had created. He had a choice in those 15 minutes: press until the jet turned into a smoking carcass, or preserve enough fuel to fly back and be someone in his daughter's life the next morning. He chose both. He rewired the flight path like a chess move. He would do one last run. The most dangerous fire geometry he could muster. Then climb hard and pull a low-altitude escape toward a friendly refuel staging point hidden in a ravine 3 clicks west. It was a risk of risk. The escape route was narrow and loaded with anti-air traps, but it bought him the life he needed to keep his promise. He set the angle, locked the GAU, and dove. This pass was surgical. He aimed not for the men themselves but for their supply line. Exploding crates became a language he spoke fluently. He read the valley like sheet music and converted it into destruction. One by one, the final connectors of the flanking threat, runners, ammo, command wires, were cut. The valley's heartbeat slowed, and then as he pulled up, the worst possibility unfurled. A heavy caliber round, perhaps an old Soviet relic, found its mark. It struck the left engine housing. The A-10 lurched wildly. A string of indicator lights burst into warning. A plume of oil traced a thin, black ribbon across the sky. Malik felt the plane buck like an animal in pain. He cursed. A simple, honest sound. The A-10 still flew, but its anger was wounded. He wrestled with the stick, nursed thrust, and found, with the stubbornness of men who have survived worse, that the jet would still respond. But every second became a negotiation. Return Plan B. He said under his breath, voice barely audible over the roar. He lined the jet for the ravine and tucked his shoulder into a man's prayer. He had bought those men their extraction window. He had turned a math problem of impossible odds into a suffocating sliver of hope. He had also, possibly, signed a paper with fate that might be due for collection. The valley held its breath as the A-10, wounded and defiant, dipped toward the ravine. Down below, Mason and Diaz crossed a final crest and saw a sight that gambled between salvation and another nightmare: a battered but upright CH-47. Heavy rotor blades spinning, dust clouds swirling. Already touching down at the makeshift beacon. Someone at base had moved faster than policy, faster than doctrine. Someone had finally given the order. Someone had listened. Mason's chest unclenched just enough to let a single shout out, "See! Don't stop! Don't stop!" Malik, high above, watched the patch of uplift and felt the jet shudder as he negotiated the ravine. The wings screeched, and a fresh warning light blinked. Hydraulic pressure dropping. He gritted his teeth and whispered to the metal carcass beneath him. Just a little farther. He would not live in an impossible dreamscape. He would live to tell his daughter he had been brave, not because courage was clean, but because bravery often arrives in the unfinished, messy places where people have to choose between fear and the faces they love. The CH-47's rotors slammed the air in massive slow thunder strokes, shaking loose gravel, rattling broken shale off ledges. The rear ramp was already down, and 2 crew chiefs were out on harness, laying suppressive bursts into the ridgeline even though no one could see much anymore. Mason hauled Diaz the last meters on pure stubborn physics. Diaz screamed through clenched teeth once, a primal, feral explosion. Mason didn't apologize, he just dragged. Because the human body wasn't strong enough to carry the weight of hope at that moment. It needed rage. Halfway to the ramp, Diaz's head lolled sideways and Mason slapped his cheek with one brutal motion. "Not yet, Diaz. Not yet, you do not die in the last minute. No one gets to die after all this." Diaz forced a thick breath, eyes glassy but present. I can do one more push," he choked. Together, they rolled, crawled and fell up the ramp. The crew chiefs closed around them, grabbing bodies, pulling them into the bird like a human net cast from heaven. Inside the cabin, Diaz collapsed into the steel floor with the kind of surrender only a near, dead man understands. He whispered, "We actually survive." Mason fell to his knees next to him, chest heaving, head bowed, sweat and dust mixing into a slurry that dripped off his jaw. His body wanted to shut off. His mind wouldn't let it. "Lock us in," Mason shouted. The crew chief slammed the ramp lever. The rear seal clamped shut. The pilot screamed over intercom, "We are not airborne yet. We don't have clearance to lift." "Lift anyway," Mason barked. "We won't get another window." The pilot hesitated, military laws slicing against instinct. He looked into the cargo bay. Saw the dying team, bleeding, shaking, and he defied every manual ever written. "Straps in, we're taking off." The CH-47 thrummed, bucked, and then began to lift. Awkwardly at first. Struggling through debris air density like an animal pulling itself out of a grave. Then stronger, climbing. As they rose, Mason stared down at the valley in disbelief. Smoke trailed across shattered fortifications. The battlefield looked like a myth had fought a war and left ruin as evidence. And then, he saw it. The A-10, struggling low, wobbling in a wounded climb through a side ravine. Smoke curling from the port engine like a dark signature. "Whoever that pilot is," Mason said to no one and to everyone, "we owe him our lives." In the cockpit of the Hog, Malik was losing sensation in his left leg. Stress response, possibly a minor G-force injury. Possibly adrenaline crash. Possibly something worse triggered by old trauma memory loops. He didn't care. The ravine narrowed. Wickedly. Even at low throttle the wing tips had maybe 6 meters clearance on each side. If he misjudged a single centimeter, the A-10 would shear, cartwheel, and explode against black basalt. He tracked the canyon by touch. Like a pianist reading sheet music by fingertip memory alone. He tapped micro adjustments into roll, yaw, pitch, every fraction of a degree calculated not by computers, but by a decade forgotten in muscle tissue. Then the RWR screamed again. A ground launcher. A small old Soviet hand, me down. Fired from a concealed ridge mouth. He didn't see the missile but he heard its ghost through vibration on fuselage. The Hog jolted. Second impact. Right wing underside. His vision blurred momentarily. Blood pressure spike. G-lock flicker. And he punched his leg instinctively to wake sensation back. The jet was now missing smooth lift. He had to choose. Bail or force land. But where? There was no suitable place. Except maybe that dried riverbed plateau not far from the base outskirts. He'd seen it once in training years ago. It wasn't meant for landing. But it was flat enough that if he could glide dead there, maybe the hog wouldn't break into a fireball. He whispered again to the jet, his voice a trembling father's plea this time. I can't die today. Not like this. Not before I tuck her in again. He committed. He rotated slightly right, coaxed lift, shaped slipstream, forced the wounded hog toward the plateau like a man steering a wounded animal back to stable ground. Smoke burned his nostrils. His hands burned on the throttle. And then, a flash image of his daughter in her pajamas. The night she asked him if he still loved flying. He gritted hard, muscles fighting collapse. I love flying. I hate losing. He lowered gear manually. The auto hydraulics were gone. The left wheel extended crookedly, half resistance. The right clicked. The nose gear locked like stubborn hope. The plateau appeared, gray and hard, an ancient river scar. He lowered flaps. He blood airspeed. He tensed. The hog slammed down, hard. Metal screamed like a tortured soul. The left tire snapped, grinding into sparks. The plane skidded sideways, metal screaming as it threw dirt and stone 20 feet high. Until it finally jerked to a brutal stop. Silence hit. Malik stared forward, breathless, shaking. The world outside was dead quiet except for a single faint sound. A wind gust rolling dust over the ruined wings. He reached for canopy release. It stuck. He hit it again. It popped. Cold desert air flooded in. He tried to climb out, but his left leg gave out entirely, and he collapsed halfway onto the dusty plateau, coughing, lungs burning, vision flickering in and out. But he was alive. That was enough. In the CH-47, Mason finally felt the helicopter reach stable altitude. They were outbound. They were leaving death behind. He looked out the side port window, scanning, searching, hunting for the A-10. He spotted black smoke trail in the distance, but not fire. He whispered so quietly only he could hear, hold on, whoever you are. We're coming back for you. Diaz wasn't conscious anymore, but his chest still rose and fell. Mason placed a hand on his shoulder. The kind of touch men give brothers they refuse to lose. The kind of promise that will require another miracle. The med bay at Bagram was chaos when the SEALs were rushed in. Trauma surgeons barking orders, corpsmen sprinting with fluids, burn techs calling for crash carts. Diaz was wheeled straight into surgical bay 4. Mason refused to leave the glass window until they forced him to sit down and let his own wounds get looked at. He didn't even feel the bandages going on. But none of the chaos in that building, none of the screams, none of the adrenaline, was what his mind was locked on. He only saw one thing replaying inside his skull over and over like a cracked film reel. That A-10 rolling in through hell. Alone. And making death itself pause. He kept looking at the runway in the distance, expecting someone to tell him the pilot had taxied in, walked off, and was sitting somewhere, drinking water, alive. But no one said anything. Because no one on staff even knew who flew it. The entire base's chain was scrambled. Ops had shut down the discussion until they understood it legally. Everyone had seen the hog go off the board into a smoke trail west of base. But no one had confirmation of recovery. Mason clenched his teeth until his jaw trembled. No. He whispered. He didn't die after that. Not after flying like that. A nurse placed a blanket around him. He didn't respond. Half a building away. The base commander slammed his own office door with such force the wall shook. He paced, livid, furious, terrified of the politics that were about to detonate. Who authorized him to launch? Who signed off? Who even let him in the cockpit? I need a name. But no one could say. Every person involved took the same silent risk. They protected the man who saved those SEALs like a sacred secret. Outside, winter light was breaking dawn. A small emergency recovery convoy was dispatched quietly. No loud order, no ceremony. Just 4 men who knew they had to go find a wounded pilot before insurgents or exposure did. One of them was Mason. He limped the entire way. Plus, the plateau looked like a plain graveyard. The A-10 sitting ugly and broken, a steel animal breathing its final breaths. The morning air cut like glass. Malik was half conscious, leaning against the wing, jacket wrapped around his leg to stop the bleeding. He couldn't stand. Could barely drink the half-empty canteen near his hands. He had been awake the entire night. Forcing himself to stay conscious. Because he promised one small human being that he would come home. He fought every instinct to close his eyes. Because he knew if he closed them here, they'd never open again. When he finally heard the hum of a Humvee engine in the distance, he honestly thought he was hallucinating. The Humvee screeched to a stop. Boots slammed the earth. "Pilot, hey, Pellet, can you hear me?" Malik tried to turn but his neck muscle spasmed. Footsteps. Fast. Then slowing. Then stopping cold. Mason stood right in front of him. Those two men stared into each other like fate had thrown a punchline into the universe. "You're the one," Mason whispered. He knelt. His voice broke in a way he didn't expect. "You're the one who saved us." Malik's lips trembled. He tried to speak. Nothing came out but air at first. Then finally, a hoarse whisper, "Did your men make it?" Mason nodded. All alive. Malik closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let that truth settle into the places inside him that had been carved open for 10 long years. Then Mason grabbed his hand. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Malik swallowed. His throat burned as he said it. "Just a janitor." Mason stared at him. And something in his soul shifted permanently. "No," he said. "You're the reason we get to grow old." 3 days later. Malik woke in a recovery ward. His daughter was holding his hand, asleep in the chair next to him. Her tiny fingers wrapped so tight around his that his blood pressure cuff had creased. He ran his palm across her hair. No words came for a long time. Then she slowly opened her eyes and whispered, barely audible, "Daddy, did you fly again?" He looked at her. Not like a broken man. Not like a man defined only by guilt. But like a man who just finally forgave himself for surviving a decade earlier. "Yes," he whispered. She smiled small. Sleepy. As if that was the most normal answer in the universe. "Were you scared?" He nodded once. "Very. And you still did it?" "Yes." She squeezed his hand tighter. "That means you're brave." Outside the window. Down the corridor. Mason was signing his discharge papers. Diaz in the wheelchair beside him was pale but grinning with half his face taped. "You think we'll ever meet him officially?" Diaz asked. Mason looked toward the glass ICU wing where Malik was recovering. Mason's voice lowered into a tone that only men who've had death, literally on their shoulders, ever acquire. "Some heroes don't need medals," he said. "They need second chances." Diaz nodded slowly, understanding more in that second than most people learned in a lifetime. Mason added quietly. "And I hope Command never tries to punish him for this. Because history doesn't belong to the safe ones. It belongs to the ones who show up when math says we die." Diaz smirked. "So what do we do if they do try?" Mason cracked a rare, dangerous half-smile. "We testify." They bumped fists gently, brothers with unspoken pact. Later, Malik stepped out of the hospital 2 weeks after discharge, physical re-eval, walking cane in hand. His daughter beside him. Winter air sharp, his face leaner, but steadier. He didn't look like a man drowning anymore. He looked like a man who had returned to Earth from somewhere deeper than hell. As they walked across the base sidewalk, the ground crew from that night silently lined up, like they'd planned it without saying a word. One by one, no ranks, no salutes, just quiet acknowledgement. Malik paused, stunned, emotion flooding behind his ribs. One airman spoke gently. "That wasn't a night we'll forget, sir." Malik nodded once. Slow, humble, human. He walked on. His daughter looked up at him. "Daddy, are you done flying forever now?" Malik took a long breath. Tasted winter. Tasted survival. Tasted a world where fear no longer owned him the way it once did. "No," he said softly. "I'm done flying for war. But not done flying." He looked toward the horizon. A horizon that didn't look like a grave anymore. But like a new chapter he hadn't written yet. "I think," he said with the smallest smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "Next time we fly, it'll be together." The two of them walked into the future quietly. A janitor who saved a SEAL team. A father who saved himself. A man who proved one brutal,